I would be telling Bibi, finish the job once and for all with these butchers, Hamas. They're terrorists. They're massacring innocent people. They would wipe every Jew off the globe if they could. He cannot live with that threat right by his country. The Hamas should release every hostage, and they should unconditionally surrender. I'm sick of hearing the media. I'm sick of hearing other people blame Israel just for defending itself. We will stand with Israel in word and in deed, in public and in private. And I can tell you, as governor, I actually did something about it. Biden's neglect has been atrocious. We had Floridians that were over there after the attack. He left them stranded. They couldn't get flights out. So I scrambled resources in Florida. I sent planes over to Israel, and I brought back over 700 people to safety. There could have been more hostages had we not acted. And I'll tell you this, I met the first plane load when they came to Florida, and one of the mothers pointed to a 6-year-old daughter, and she said, my daughter had been saying the last 2 nights, Mommy, I don't want to hear any more bombs, no more rockets. I just want to get back to Florida.
Okay, so get the job done. Obviously, he talked about it obviously from that one perspective. They went through most of the candidates and it was largely the same, perhaps even more bloodthirsty. Let's roll a little montage for you.
The first thing I said to him when it happened was I said, finish them, finish them.
I would tell him to smoke those terrorists on his southern border. And then I'll tell him as president of the United States, I'll be smoking the terrorists on our southern border.
There was even more of that, but you get the idea. A lot of people have got to die. And I for the last 3 months or so, I haven't really been following the news so much, except for perhaps on this issue, because it's so big that it transcends anything else. If you just decided to tune into this debate and you had not been following everything that had happened, and you were just going by the way they were talking about it, you would have a view of the nature of the conflict and who has died that would be a little bit out of line with reality. And what I found interesting, we're gonna get to the one acknowledgement of Palestinian deaths that came from the moderators. But aside from that, and we will play that for you, there was no acknowledgement by the candidates. That's perhaps not surprising. They are Republicans. But even from the moderators, it was entirely what we are going to say and do to support the hunt for Hamas. That was it. No need to acknowledge any Palestinian deaths. Nothing about the particular nature of the war, how it might go in the future. It was hyper specific, and I understand why they would want it to be for their base. But this was not a Fox News debate. It seemed weird to me that Welker and Holt had no interest in contextualizing the conflict even a little bit. What do you guys think?
Well, the question was, what would you say to Benjamin Netanyahu, which is just, I mean, from your perspective, probably just enough rope to hang themselves with. And they took that rope, and in your opinion,
I understand that, but the conversation about this topic went on for a fairly significant chunk. It might have been the single longest topic that was discussed at this debate. And aside from, well, why don't we actually play the question to Chris Christie about a Palestinian child who died in America? It was the only acknowledgement of those sorts of deaths. Let's play that.
Governor Christie, and considering what he just said, you led a state with a sizable Muslim population. Last month, as you know, a 6-year-old Palestinian American boy was killed in Illinois by his landlord. His mother was also stabbed more than a dozen times in what has been charged as a hate crime. What do you say to Muslim Americans who are also feeling afraid for their safety right now?
Lester, I'm the only one on the stage who's actually had experience in dealing with this. I was appointed by President Bush to be the U.S. Attorney in New Jersey on September 10th. 2001. And when I took over that job after the September 11th attacks, I had to deal with a situation in our state that was explosive. We're the most ethnically diverse state in this country. And so first, we heard credible reports about Jewish students and synagogues being threatened in our state in the aftermath of 9/11. We made sure that we sent federal agents to those synagogues and we protected them, and the same thing should be being done now. At the very same time, I personally went from mosque to mosque in New Jersey and met with the leaders of those mosques and with the members of the mosques. And I said to them, law enforcement is on your side to protect you, regardless of your religion, if you are going to comply with the law. And we developed fabulous relationships with Muslim Americans all across the state of New Jersey, and we stopped any hate crimes that were going on either against Jewish Americans in New Jersey or Muslim Americans in New Jersey. It takes leadership, Lester, to know how to do this. You must work with both sides. Both sides need to know it, but let us never have a false moral equivalence between Hamas and Hezbollah and the Jewish people. The Jewish people stand for right and justice, and Hamas and Hezbollah stand for death.
Okay, so that I think there wouldn't be any debate is probably the most reasonable or empathetic response from any of those on the stage, even though again, he didn't directly talk about that murder that had taken place in America. But aside from that, I don't know if there was any acknowledgement through the entire course of the conversation about Israel, Palestine, a topic that they return to every once in a while in comments later on in the debate about the more than 10,000 deaths. And it just seems utterly bizarre. Not that they would avoid it, but that the moderators would do virtually nothing to make sure that the audience has that context.
Well, John, you said other than that. That included. That had nothing to do with the question. When did he mention the boy that was killed in his?
He talked about anti-Islamic hate crimes.
Yeah. What does that have to do with the boy?
He did in general.
That was what the question was about.
That's why I'm giving him.
The framing of their questions was, "What do you tell Benjamin Netanyahu?" That's their way of engaging these guys about their position on Israel. They didn't do, as John points out, any follows to be like, what about the 10,000 Palestinians who have died as a result of this attack? When you're saying, because all those guys artfully said, and women and Nikki Haley artfully said, finish the job, wipe them off the map. That's what they started with. And then 3 sentences later says, I'm talking about Hamas. Normal people would go like, so what about the Palestinians? What about all the Palestinians living around the sides of Hamas that are being used as human shields by Hamas? And the Israeli government is killing by as I said, 10,000s to kill 48 operatives from Hamas. There was none of that follow-up, as John points out. But the next 2 questions were, what do you do about anti-Semitism that's growing? And followed by, what do you do about anti-Islamic hate that's growing as a result of it? So I think, and that was the reason for bringing up the kid who was killed. He missed saying a sentence that was like, that was like, I am sad that child is dead. And that is just as I agree with you, an unforced error for Chris Christie. But at least he has a record of, and he's on record saying, listen, he's not making the mistake of saying, I only feel bad for the victims of anti-Semitism. He's not making the mistake of saying, I only feel bad for victims of Islamophobia. He said, after he said, mysteriously, he got the job on 9/10. 9/11 happened the day later, kind of making him a suspect in 9/11. I think John points that out. Look at his face. But after that, he went through and said both of those things are bad. And I have a track record of fighting against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, which I think should be on as many people's mouths, coming out of as many people's mouths as possible right now.
Yeah, whereas Ron DeSantis, like I believe the only reference to Islamophobia by a candidate was so-called Islamophobia, amidst all of them completely having no interest whatsoever in 10,000 dead. For a group of people who are going to spend a significant portion of the debate talking about how much they care about the lives of children, the fact that thousands of children are dead apparently doesn't bother them whatsoever. Believes that Islamophobia is not a thing. It seems like a great demonstration that it exists in certain forms. But
John,
anyway,
even talking about them as victims cowering in libraries at school, and that never talk about their own track record on just like garden variety school shootings that they do nothing about. Like that was the tone deafness I also heard in that.
And I also, let me know if you think that this is going too far, because obviously if we can't even expect one of the 3 moderators to mention the passage of 10,000 dead, then we can't expect what I'm about to say. But since anti-Semitism is a very significant issue, we've seen, online massive amounts of anti-Semitism. You can expect, as they pointed out, on campuses and things like that too. It is somewhat convenient that all of a sudden some of these Republican presidential candidates suddenly care about anti-Semitism. Where were they when people were marching and saying the Jews will not replace us? Like how many of them have gone on the shows or and participated with people who have often preached incredibly anti-Semitic comments? It is a significant strain of the modern conservative movement, and it almost never gets acknowledged, certainly not shouted down because they don't want to burn their own base. But all of a sudden, after the Hamas attack, suddenly they care about it a lot. Maybe that's a context that they would never add, but I think it would make for a pretty fascinating conversation.
Well, the one thing we were able to see throughout this debate is the way that they don't care about things from omission. Let's keep it real. So from not talking about those things, then of course they can act like it doesn't exist, or it's selective. So Brett, you talked earlier about how there's a job interview. So you just maybe not tell them about some of the things that you had in your previous job or your experience, or things you probably don't care about that you probably should care about as you come into this job. And then as the job of the moderator, not actually asking them that, because I guarantee you they didn't have to be asked about the violence going on and the anti-Semitism and the Jewish folks that were brutally murdered. Didn't have to be asked about because it's right there and we should be talking about it as they should. But why can't they talk about it? The problem is it gives too much humanity to the folks that are being killed. It just is. There's humanity for certain folks and not for others when it comes to our politicians. And not because they have principles. Because look, this is not a Republican thing. It's a Democratic and Republican thing. I was thinking the entire time they were talking about how they're hell-bent on bombing more, killing many people as possible, acting like there's not innocent people that they're killing. As it was going through that, I was like, well, wait a second. When is somebody going to say, so you're in support of Joe Biden, President Biden, and his mission right now? Am I correct? Because you're supposed to always be in opposition to what the current president is if you're running for president in the opposition party. So you agree with him on this. You have to, right? Because he's doing exactly what anyone else would be doing as far as the folks that are on stage and trying to get into office at the same time. So if you're on board with that, at least acknowledge, as far as leadership goes in this country, this is the way it'd be going no matter what. But they still have to try and find some kind of divide, but there isn't. It's just the way it is.
Except for Ron DeSantis, who says, I scrambled some jets. And he said, did you notice that Ron DeSantis goes, I scrambled jets to go to Israel to pick up people after the attack. And then he follows it up with, and thanks to me, there are fewer hostages than there could have been, even though the attacks were days old by the time his jets got there. Yeah, he basically says he saved hostages, which he absolutely did not. That is insane, unhinged, and ridiculous.
He was talking about the New York Jets, right?
It made no sense substantively, but it did remind me that Ron DeSantis is a guy who is really, really invested in sending people in planes from one place to another. He shows a level of interest in transportation that Pete Buttigieg never did before he was put in charge of that department. Let me just say, maybe that's what he's looking for in the next Trump administration.